Oh, Slater.
Oh,
Yeah.
I haven't. I've seen it on TV,
Yeah.
but
Well, that's the kind of a ship he was on. And they were, it, it's funny about World War II we've had so many wars, but it was very different. People who came back from World War II never talked about it. That just wasn't something that they did. And I'm sure they all had lots of things that they would have been good for them to have talked about. But they went in on D-Day just behind the first wave, just behind the what do you call them? They go minesweepers. So that had they missed any, of course, they would have hit them and blown up, but they didn't. So when he got back from there, from the war, he went to Middlebury College thinking, well, what am I going to do? And he had a wonderful sense of humor, and he said, I thought, well, in those days we had a homeopathic doctor, and no matter what happened, he'd say, well, you take a couple of these little pills and you'll be fine. He said, well, that doesn't seem so hard. I guess I'll go do that. But when he got to Middlebury, he found that he had to take chemistry, which he failed miserably, so he decided he'd do something else. And then something else happened to be that there was a play, and he auditioned for it. And so we met doing plays all in school. I was a theater major and a sociology major. So when we went into summer stock and did 3 years of summer stock, and then ultimately, when we got back to it all, he decided it's so hard to make a living as an actor. It just ain't easy. But he decided, well, I could teach, but if you're going to teach in a college level, you've got to have a doctorate. So we moved to Minnesota, and he got his doctorate in theater. I worked in I taught in a school, an independent school called St. Paul Academy in Summit School, and then I took classes and got not a degree but a certificate that I could teach preschool. And then the wonderful thing about, the thing that was fun about Minneapolis was they had about, if you add the professional equity shows, the ones you get paid for, or all the community theaters, there are about 25 theaters. So for both of us, it was fun because Warren began to get jobs that he got paid for. And then I had one equity job that I did, and then I did a play every year. So it was fun. We really loved Minnesota. It was a great state.
Ginesy, a couple of questions. First off, I'm going to ask that you don't look at Lisa.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because the way that we shoot is if you look off to the side, it's distracting.
Yeah.
Just kind of look at me.
Okay, you're the person I'm talking to.
Well, the way that the camera is situated.
And it's their job to to find me.
And just spell for me Calhoun.
Calhoun.
Okay, we want to make sure to get that right.
Yeah.
Now, introduce us to your husband. My husband was so-and-so who was in all of those stuff, like that we know, but the audience won't know.
Okay. Warren was born and brought up in Essex Junction, Vermont. And I don't know, do you know Vermont very well?
A little
Yeah.
bit,
It's a lovely state, but in those days, back, it was very tiny town. It was where his mother had been born. His father who was just marvelous, was Warren also. And he had been in World War I. He was an ambulance driver in World War I. And his mother, the little baby on the left in the picture that's over there on the left, was a school teacher. And they didn't have any kindergartens in Vermont in those days. So she started one in her basement when she had, after Warren had been born, because they needed more money. So she had her, what was it called? It was a darling little, she had the little chairs, that you sit in. And she made a very nice place for them there. But when he came back from the war, it wasn't a good place for someone just back from a war. So he decided he'd go to Middlebury. And as I say, he thought he'd be a doctor, but he couldn't because he couldn't pass chemistry. But he did start doing theater. And we both did for years. And then when we finally got to Minnesota, with a time out selling real estate, which was not his cup of tea at all, and then it just grew from there. Wonderful opportunities there. And then when he met Andy Griffith, he had done one show, and as we always joked, he said, Andy said to him that he'd like to use him, and then he did. And he was with him, and he always called every Christmas, how are you? Always sent us flowers for Christmas. He was just a dear, sweet man. And it was a lovely, a lovely friendship.
Now, sum it up for me. Try to finish this thought for me. My husband, Warren Frost, was or you might know my husband, Warren Frost, from Matlock. You might know him from, sort of sum up, the number of shows for me in a sentence or two that people might know him from.
He did a lot on the stage, which he never did Broadway. But in Florida, there's a theater called the Oslo Theater, which is professional. So he did plays like, of course, I'm not going to think. Well, the one that he was the most well known for was he wrote a play, or a one-man show about Mark Twain. And he wrote his own and got a white suit and a white wig. So he did that all over in many, many places. That was he did. And then he was doing character roles. He was a character actor, really, more than a leading man. I remember, well, I can't think, I'm trying to think, those wouldn't have been things that people would have seen on television, of course. So in the early days, he didn't do a lot of that. Let me think. Matlock, well, Twin Peaks.
Do it in a whole sentence for me. My husband, Warren Frost, was on,
Okay.
Blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
A, B, C, D,
Yeah.
just to
Yeah.
kind of list those in one.
Okay. My husband, Warren Frost, was on several shows, not many on television, except for Twin Peaks, because our son, Mark Frost, was one of the original creators of Twin Peaks and a writer. So Warren had a role on that for many years, and that was fun. And then the Matlock show, he did many of those, and that was great fun. The theater shows that he did that were equity, meaning professional as opposed to being amateur, and was, I'm trying to think of things that might have been on television.
I think his most infamous role, people might argue, is on Seinfeld.
Yes, I would
Tell me
think
about
so.
that.
I would think that Seinfeld was a lot of fun. It was a very nice cast. It was very professional. It wasn't a cast where you didn't hang out together like you would in a summer stock or so forth. But the cast was great.
Tell me, Warren was on Seinfeld and he played well.
Okay. In Seinfeld, there was a character, Seinfeld himself was, he had a buddy who was sort of a nerd, and he was going to get married. George, I couldn't think of his name, yes. Well, George was going to get married, and his daughter, and he was so cheap that he bought cheap envelopes for invitations, and in licking the envelopes, it killed her.
Was it glue?
And Warren played her father. So that didn't go down very well. And there was one time where he even bought a gun, and the last thing was probably he was going to shoot them. Well, he didn't, because that isn't the way it ended. But anyway, that was one episode they might remember. Someone might remember if they'd ever seen Seinfeld.
I think they'll always remember the episode with Susan licking the glue.
Oh, that's it. Well, he was her father, who was, needless to say, pretty upset. And they did have him, I believe there was a shot of him buying a gun, and you thought, aha. But that isn't the way it ended.
Tell me that on camera that he played Susan, George's fiance, Susan's father. Or
yeah.
like that.
There were, in Seinfeld, he had a friend who was sort of a nerd, but he was engaged to a girl, I can't remember her name right. Susan, yes, her name was Susan. And George was so cheap that when they bought invitations to the wedding, the glue on the invitations somehow was poison and killed her. So, of course, her father was not too pleased with that. So he bought a gun, and the thought was, of course, he was going to kill him. But that didn't happen, because they decided that wasn't the ending they wanted, but they didn't finish it, that it ever went out, and the ending was supposed to be a surprise. And as I recall, I don't know whether they all went down in a plane wreck. I've forgotten what it was.
Now sum it up for me in one thought, that Warren played the father of Susan, George's fiance, something like that.
Okay. Well, in the show called Seinfeld, Warren played George's, that was Seinfeld's buddy, who was sort of dumb, and he was engaged to Warren's daughter. And when they licked the envelopes that they were going to send out, it poisoned her. So, of course, her father was furious. And I think the last shot of him in that was when he bought the gun and you didn't know whether he was going to shoot it. And then I've forgotten, they had some silly ending, like they all got on an airplane and cried. I don't even remember, but it was funny.
Did Warren have a lot of fun on that show, on Seinfeld?
Yes, that was fun. I think he had the most fun with Matlock because Andy Griffith was just great. And it was so interesting that he had, I can't think what the other show that he did that Warren had a small part on. I don't think it was Matlock. I'm not sure. But he had said to Warren, because he liked professionalism, and Warren knew what he was doing. He was very good. So he knew his lines. He knew how to play. And Andy was very impressed with that. And he did say, if I ever get a chance to work with you again, I'd like to very much. And he was as good as his word. So he did, in fact, find a role for him to play. And he played a man. And Andy did this thing that was fun. They ran out the short story of, yes, he would play the in the Matlock one, he would play a sort of a dumb guy who was so stupid he did everything wrong, and he irritated the character very much. And then they'd sort of run that to the ground. And Andy said, what can we do to make this so we can keep the show going? And Warren actually made the suggestion, and Andy appreciated it. And the suggestion was, couldn't I suddenly make a lot of money or inherit something? And then it could be more, he could suddenly have fancy clothes and be able to do more things. And he said, yeah, let's try that. So they did.
What show was he on the longest?
Well, Twin Peaks, because he was in the very beginning of that. And he also, actually 2 years ago, they were making a sequel, and he did On the Front Porch here in Taborton near Troy. They filmed it on the front porch, and when they started the new series, they did use it, but he had died at that time. I haven't seen it, but he was in it.
What year did your husband pass?
He died in, April this year. Unfortunately, he had developed Alzheimer's, which needs a lot of help getting around. It's something I would like to be able to work on as a charity to raise money for that, because it's very cruel. And he was, it's just a very tragic illness.
How long had he been diagnosed, or not?
I'm trying to think. We began to find things that he was forgetting a lot. We were living in Vermont, and we lived in a place sort of like this, although it was more in the country, of course, in Vermont. So his doctor realized what was happening. And he said, I think I need glasses or something. I can't read. And that was when his doctor said to me and to Warren, you can't read, Warren, because you have Alzheimer's disease, and it takes away that ability. And he was able, we lived in a cottage at the place, and ultimately he had to move into the special care unit where they had marvelous help. So that was a very hard time for all of us.
Where did you move before here? Where did you move from?
Middlebury, Vermont. That's where we had gone to college. And Warren had grown up in this little town. And
How did you get to Beechwood in Troy, New York?
well, when Scotty, the son who lives here, was with me, and Lindsay had come up to see him when he was still recognized her, and then he didn't recognize any of us. So I decided I loved Vermont and had a lot of friends, but my daughter had already decided that she was going to move back next to my son, Scott, and I thought, that's where I should be. It's home, really. Although I haven't lived here in years. But it just seemed the right thing to do, and it has been. I found Beechwood, and it's been excellent. As you can see, the apartment's lovely. I have made good friends, and I'm going to have 2 of my children living here 20 minutes away. So it seemed right. And so that's what we're doing.
Beautiful. Now introduce us to your son, who's a little piece of Hollywood.
Oh yes, Mark.
My son Mark.
Yeah, my son Mark Frost is a writer, and he started out first when he was in Minneapolis. He went to Carnegie Mellon University. He came in Minnesota, in Minneapolis and St. Paul. There were over 20-some theaters. Mark was very engrossed in theater in college. Excuse me. And so he decided that he would like to make his business to be in theater. He also is a writer, and he's written many interesting books. He loves sports. His first big book was The Greatest Game Ever Played, and it was about golf. And then he has, I'm looking over here because I have his books and Scott's books. He's also an author.
They were both
writers. Scotty wrote mystery stories, and Mark wrote 2 books about golf. He wrote, many, many things, as well as television shows.
Tell me, my son Mark Frost was perhaps best known for XY television series.
Yeah. I think my son Mark Frost would probably be known more from Twin Peaks, which has been redone, and he's in fact written some of the new ones that are just going on air now. He also wrote mystery. He wrote a very weird mystery called The List of Seven. And he has been very successful.
Are there other shows that he's written that we would know from TV? Or
I can't think of one that would be on television that would be so much. His books, perhaps more, and Twin Peaks. The List of Seven was a book, not not a film.
Okay, now introduce us, my daughter Lindsay, and the soap opera that you were telling me about earlier.
Our daughter Lindsay, and I must say that Lindsay's name is because that was Warren's middle name. And I loved the name, so we named her Lindsay. And as Lindsay grew up, she became very interested in theater. And she went to a school it was a conservatory school, 3-year-old conservatory school, meaning it wasn't liberal arts, it was learning about theater. And so she went 3 years and came home to Minnesota, where we were living at that time, and said, well, Dad, could you give me $300? Because if you could, I can go back to Minneapolis very quickly. I can go back to into New York, and they will do take a shot of me, and you do a thing it's put on tape, and then they can show it to the agents in New York, and that would be just great. And Warren rolled his eyes and said, yeah, that and $5 will buy you a cup of coffee, but go ahead and try. So she went to New York, did the tape, came home, and was waiting to hear. She had a dental appointment, as a matter of fact, and she got a call, and she said, you're not going to believe this, but they've hired me to take over Meg Ryan's part in As the World Turns. And we all just about flipped. So indeed, she did just exactly that. She got the part. She was on it several years. She was in a play on Broadway called M. Butterfly, which ran quite a while. And then when she was finished with that, she went back, and they decided to move to the West Coast, and she had a very nice career. Did I can't think of, there were short plays, things that didn't run a long time, but usually people remember a soap opera if they happen to be addicted to soap operas.
Tell me, now Lindsay paints, she has a whatever.
Yeah. Now that she's all grown up, Lindsay went back to what she'd started when she was first in high school, actually, and that was painting. And it's been fascinating. Of course, she's wild about baseball because her son, Lucas, is a pitcher for the Chicago White Sox. So she started painting pictures of baseball hats. In fact, made she has all the professional baseball hats in one great big picture. And those are now sold in all the baseball parks all over, all the professional baseball parks. And then she kept growing on with what she was painting. And there's some interesting things. On the West Coast, they do surfboarding. So she paints surfboards. Now, they're not to ride on, but for example, Luke's agent asked her, would she make one? And they have a cottage on a beach somewhere in California, and they're putting it on the door of their cabin. And another sweet thing that happened, his agent, Lucas's agent, asked her, Lindsay, my daughter, if she would paint a picture of his wife with their baby. And she'd never done that. She said, well, gosh, I'll try. Well, he adored it. And so that's when she had begun doing some people as well. So she loves to paint, and that's what she does now.
Now, you were telling me earlier that her son, that she was saying something like she's wild, Lindsay, my daughter, is wild about baseball because her son is blah, blah, blah. But will you say that again, only include Lucas's name in it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The reason Lindsay got so crazy about painting pictures of baseball hats is because her son, Lucas, her oldest son, was originally, right out of high school, signed by the Nationals, the Washington Nationals. He was in their minor leagues, played, I think, one or two short bits in the majors. It wasn't too good. He was pretty young still then. But he's kept at it, and he was traded to the Chicago White Sox. And they have a marvelous pitching coach, and I don't know his name, but he's done wonders. And so Lucas Giolito is now a starting pitcher for the Chicago White Sox. And we just watched a tape of him last week, and he's going to play another game for the Chicago White Sox next week.
How excited are you?
Oh, well, of course, Scott, his uncle, and Valerie, his wife, and all of us are absolutely out of our minds with excitement. And so we're very excited. We've always loved baseball. It's been something we've loved. Warren loved the game, to watch it, and we've always been baseball fans. But now it's part of our family, and we're thrilled to pieces.
Now, your third son, Scott, right?
No, I have just two sons.
Or your third child, Scott.
Yeah, my younger son, Scott, full name is Scott Lawson Frost. He is a photographer. Now, I don't mean he takes family pictures, but that was his major at the University of Minnesota, was creative photography. He just had a showing of 4 of his pieces.
I was going to ask you, it's just because of the siren.
Yeah, that wasn't any good, right? Because of the siren.
Right.
Yeah.
Should I try closing the window?
I'll just stop for a second.
He unfortunately developed Alzheimer's disease, which is such a cruel thing. And we had retired to Vermont, where we went to college. And so he was an actor, as you probably know. And that was a nice picture of him when he was older.
That's beautiful.
And then these are all just things that if you're interested in, fine. If you're not, that's fine too. But
we like that.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll help in what we call B-roll. Which
Yeah,
is
this
video.
is the, he was in Twin Peaks. Our son, Mark, is the writer and so forth of Twin Peaks, and with David Lynch. And here he is in, well, this was World War II.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness, look at him.
And then these are these are just copies. Lindsay has quite a business now. A lot of her workers in all of the baseball, they all have a store. Mm-hmm. And so she has a lot of her paintings there that have to do with baseball. But these are just one thing that's sells very well now. She paints, surfboards. Well, she did not for people who want them to ride on, but they put them up. For example, Lucas's agent bought one, and he has it on the door of his house.
Yes, yes.
So
I do
these
that.
are just some of the kinds of things
Oh,
that
that's
she does.
beautiful.
And then this is another kind of thing that a man has a store, and he asked her if she'd make paintings to put on, in the store that sells pies and so forth.
Where is Lindsay now?
Well, I'm so excited. At the moment, she's in Los Angeles. Santa Monica is where they live. Beautiful out there. And her Luke, of course, is in Chicago and so forth. He just went up to be in the big league and has done well. So we're very excited. So those are just examples of her work. And if you ever want to see others, there's others in here.
Yeah, that's great. We're going to want to shoot those after we talk.
Yeah, now let me see what else I have. This was our 50th wedding anniversary in Taborton, and there we are with some of our children. And here's another one. Oh, this is our baseball player there. And this is the young man who has a wonderful opportunity to go to Wales to study theater and music. And that's Scott and his wife. That's Mark's wife. This is Mark, and that's Luke. That's Lindsay's husband. And there's the baseball player. And here's the actor and singer.
Oh my goodness. What a great family.
So,
now who's on the back there?
oh yeah, I was trying to find a picture of Luke. I thought you might like a picture of him. I don't have a picture of him as a grown-up, but this is pretty well a grown-up with his mother and his younger brother, taken about, maybe 7 years ago, but it's kind of cute.
Oh, that's sweet.
And, well, blathering on here. I wanted to show you. Oh, you asked if I had any pictures from, this was the headshot. That's, they use those for a lot.
I've seen that one online.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then these were the cast of Matlock.
Oh, wow.
Whoops. So,
Andy Griffith. Oh, my goodness.
yeah. And he was on that after, when Matlock started, they did the first show of it out in LA, where we were living at that time. And he was hired to play a very small part in it. And he was sort of to be grumpy, and he was mad at the character because he ditched his sister or some silly thing like that. Well, it was such a lovely story. When it was over, Andy really liked people who were real pros. So he said, Warren, if I was producing this, I'd like to have you work for me again. And Warren thanked him, and he came home and he said, yep, and that and $5 will get you a cup of coffee. But it was true. So when he started Matlock, he called him and put him in the show. So that was just, a really nice thing to happen. So I think that's about all the stuff I have wound up, but I'm sure you might have. I don't know what you really want to know.
Okay, we're just going to ask you some questions, and we're going to get more stories. Because you have so many, my goodness. First of all, let's get your name down. Do you like to go by Ginesy or Virginia?
Yes, my actual name is Mary Virginia Calhoun. My father was the first OB doctor at the Samaritan Hospital, and I was born there. My family were divorced when I was about 8, I guess. And so I grew up living part-time in Waterville with this wonderful man up here. See the man with the mustache? That's my grandfather, Calhoun. And his family came from Scotland. And he was a marvelous tenor. And he sang all over the area here. He was head of choirs. There was a church in Waterville where he was head of the choir. But there was also one in Troy, and I can't remember. I think it was an Episcopal church, but he did the choir. So it tickles me that my younger Casey is now taking singing lessons and has a nice voice.
Now you have how many children? How many grandchildren?
3. We have Lucas, the pitcher. We have Casey, who is just graduated high school and will be going fairly in the end of the summer to Wales. And then Mark, our oldest son, has one son, and he's junior high school age. Of course, he's getting big too.
Now you have 2 kids or
3.
3 kids.
Lindsay is my daughter, and when we decided on names for the children, we didn't, when you first have what are you going to name them? And we thought, well, let's give them family middle names, but we would do make up a name for them. So Mark, just because we liked it, and he was Mark Calhoun Frost. And then when, Scott came along, we liked the name Scott, but he was named Lawson because that was my mother's name. Lawson was my grandfather who lived here and built the house out in Taborton. And then Lindsay named, again, picked out, in fact, I think the story was they couldn't decide what to call them, so they put names, the ones they pulled, and they love dogs. They've always had dogs. So one of their dogs, they said, the first one he touches, that's going to be the name. And so that's where Lucas got his name.
Angela, I'm going to stop you for 1 second. There's a little shadow